Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Louise Wadley, the director of Hebden Bridge Film Festival, just in case you hadn't noticed any of the signs behind me. We are really excited to have this Q&A. We wanted to have The Australian Dream as our Saturday night film, and we were gutted that we had to cancel the festival and then cancel the screening. So I'm really excited that the film is now available worldwide, and also that we can actually have this discussion. So I'm really pleased and excited to welcome the director, Dan Gordon. And I have to just do a little bit of a shout out, but I'll do that in a sec. Ken Monkou, I think I've said it correctly, maybe. Ex-Chelsea and Feyenoord player, I think, and Southampton and Huddersfield, and current Chelsea player and ex-England player, I think, Anita Asante. So welcome everybody. And welcome to you if you're watching us and joining us on Zoom or Facebook. And just to let you know that this documentary has just had such amazing reception, not just in Australia, as you can hear, I'm Australian, so I'm obviously a fan, but also around the world. And just about everyone I spoke to who'd been to any of the major film festivals where it played told me it was an extraordinary experience. So first of all, welcoming Dan Gordon, who people will maybe not know who Dan is, but they might know his films. So you've been making films for years, I think, Dan, about football and about other issues, but particularly the film that I think a lot of people will be affected by is the Hillsborough film, which obviously, was that 2014, Dan?
Yeah, it was played in America in 2014, but because of the inquests that were going on in the UK at the time, it was delayed until 2016. At the end of the inquest verdict, we played it on BBC One. So yeah, it was kind of ready, but then we had to do the extra. Yeah.
So obviously really happy that you could join us, and I'm not going to list all your awards and all the films you've won awards, and particularly the Australian Dream now has just got so many awards, which is fantastic, and premiered obviously at Melbourne, but also I think you were at TIFF at Toronto International Film Festival, which is a really big deal, and various other places, so fantastic. And Anita and Ken, thank you for being here, and also we must shout out to Show Racism, the Red Card, who we're presenting this with, and all the important work they're doing. And of course, they do so much work about anti-racism in school and education generally. So thank you to Show Racism, the Red Card. And if you're watching and you don't know about them, jump online, sling them a few pounds, because they could really do with everything that's going on, getting your support. We've got a few people who've turned up. Jay.
I've turned up.
Sorry, that's just a classic kind of, could you make sure? So forgive us if we have a few things pop up and pop down. What I would say to you is I'd love to just start off the discussion, Dan, by saying, could you tell me how you got involved in the film? And
yeah, we're sort of going back around 3.5, 4 years ago. We made the Hillsborough film. It had come out. It had done exceptionally well critically. We were looking at what we were going to do for our next project. That's myself and John Batson, my long time, 20 years producing partner, and a lady called Sarah Thompson, who's Australian but living in the UK, approached John with the idea of the Adam Good story, and John asked me if I thought it was a story, and I'd not heard of Adam. I barely knew Aussie rules, and I looked into the sort of bare bones of the story, and immediately it leapt out at me as an amazing story. I didn't know whether it would be a feature length. I thought it could possibly just be a 60, but I do feature length 90s, and then it didn't take me long to then be pointed. Sarah pointed me to the Stan Grant speech that makes this such a
right
film, and once I knew that Stan was really willing to be involved, and once I knew that Adam was considering being involved, because this was still only 2 years or so after he'd been forced out of the game, so it was still very raw in his mind. When I first spoken to him, it was clear he was still suffering from it. But I knew that we had the bones of an amazing film, providing we could get all the other things to slot into place.
And did you, Dan, had you been to Australia before many times or a few times? Or
Yeah, I love Australia. You know, I went traveling there 24 years ago. You know, two of my best mates love me so much they both emigrated to Australia. And you know, I'd been for work a little bit, and I was planning to go back anyway. And I managed to coincide a number of those trips with going to see my friends as
and
well.
so did you know about you know, what this, you know, obviously the documentary is really powerful. It's dealing with Adam Goodes' story, but also this whole huge thing about Australia's colonial past and legacy that, you know, lives on and affects everybody. Did you know much about that?
No, and it shames me to say that because I read history and politics at
Right.
university, and I think I know, you know, a lot of my films are about history and politics and, you know, great moments in time. And I kind of thought that I did know, but I knew nothing. I didn't even know, you know, the term terra nullius, which is empty land, which is what Captain Cook described to the Queen, you know, that this was a land for the taking. I knew none of that. I know an awful lot about the colonial past of, you know, British colonial past and the effect that it's had, particularly on Africa. I didn't really know enough about, you know, what had happened. And even the more recent shameful history, you know, and the stolen generation that's covered in the film as well. I didn't know it. And so I was discovering all this myself as we were working on the film. That's been one of the most amazing things for me, for my own personal journey of the making of the film, was learning all this stuff. But yeah, I didn't know any of it.
And did you, I mean, I think the film is extraordinary in that it blends these two big themes. Did you feel, was it a struggle, a tightrope trying to blend the story and the, you know, the context and everything?
I always feel that I don't make sports films, so
Right.
I make human stories behind sport, either sports achievements or sports events, and I felt this very much was one of those, that you won't find out how to play Aussie rules, you don't even know the rules, you don't even know what points are what, but you know what's going on, you know that this guy's an amazing athlete, you know he's achieved a lot of things, and you know he doesn't deserve to be treated as he is by the people who come to watch this game. So I kind of felt that it was more that I wasn't really treading a fine line between a sports film and a documentary. This was, for me, this was just a story that needed to be told and needed to be told again in Australia, but also in the wider international area, because there are so many parallels. We're seeing it all right now. But even when we went on tour with this back in the days when we could travel, we went to Toronto in August, September last year, but and even Amsterdam in November and London Film Festival in October, people coming up to me after those screenings and telling me that they'd seen their childhood, that they'd seen their daily life experience, even though they were not Australian.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Obviously, when you're a filmmaker, what you're hoping is for that kind of intersection between the specific and the universal, aren't you? So we've got this extraordinarily specific story with Adam's story and the whole other issues going that Stan is bringing up. But somehow, like you say, it can, and that's obviously a wonderful thing. Can I bring you in here? Because
of course.
Obviously, I wondered, you know, I was interested how this film would play to non-Australian audiences. And I just wondered, could you relate to what Adam was going through in the film itself?
Yes, it's just as this then explained in a way, because any person doesn't make any difference which background you come from. But if you've been confronted by racism and discrimination, you will pick up, you will recognize it instantly. So that's straight away. And Adam's story, the background where he came from, the way he was brought up, in a way, and being exactly exceptional in his sport, right? So you can relate to all of that straight away, and it gives you sort of shivers down your spine that you actually go, no, so I'm not the only one. There's loads of people out there with that same journey, you know. So
yeah. And did you feel like, I think we had a chat and you were telling me that for you, Adam's relationship with his mum was really special, wasn't it? I mean, in the film, that's one of the things that made me a little bit teary, was seeing that special relationship with his mum. And I think you had that kind of thing.
We as men, we always think we're hard, but you women are tough. You're made out of a different type of clay, different type of wood. So like I said, I lost my dad at the age of 14. So my mum brought us up. I'm the oldest of three. Like I said, in this sort of 3 years between all of us in a way. And like I said, growing up at the age of 14 very fast, you had to be a grown up, you know, so you missed out quite a bit of your childhood. But that in a way that teach you about the world. So I grew up very quick. I did my 2 sort of paper rounds in the morning, went off to school, got back, cooked for the family, and then at sort of 7, half 7, my mum and I used to go and clean the offices. So that sort of grounded,
wow.
so that
Yeah.
grounded you as well. So you can see from this lady, even though her sort of upbringing was very tough, as I told you, because I was born in Suriname in South America.
Mm-hmm.
Then we immigrated sort of in the late 60s to Holland. So and she was tough, you know, but she did an unbelievable job. So that's why I could definitely sort of see and mirror certain things that Adam went through, you know, myself, you know. So, and that drives you, that gives you that energy to actually succeed, you see.
Yeah, and Anita, obviously, you know, different generation, different times, but you felt very strongly affected by the film, I think you said to me.
Yeah, you know, I felt the film was extremely moving. I also felt anger and strong emotions watching what Adam went through and what many of those athletes went through during that time. And I think it reinforced to me growing up just the things that were reinforced by my own parents who were immigrants to the UK, about this feeling of you're always having to try to be exceptional at what you do, to know that you get acceptance, and to see someone like Adam who's at the elite level of his sport, regardless of how well spoken he is, he carries himself, his knowledge, how, you know, his ability, his talent, he still didn't get that acceptance on the basis of his skin color, and raising issues that were pertinent to him just proves that point, you know, of how mentally draining that is as well, to always having to try and prove yourself to a group of people based of their own prejudices or conditions for you, what's acceptable, you know, in their space.
And I suppose I wanted to ask both of you, Dan, that scene, you know, which you stitched together about Adam's betrayal by Eddie Maguire, who's the guy that we saw, you know, you're shaking, yeah. The guy who's on, you know, supposedly a friend of Adam and prepared to apologise when he's made derogatory remarks once and twice. And then we see him feeling confident enough to just broadcast on the radio yet again something. I mean, first of all, what was that like for you to watch and put together as the...
Well, again, I know, and you're Australian, so you know the context of Eddie Maguire, but I didn't know the context of Eddie Maguire. And for those who don't know, I mean, Eddie's nickname is Eddie Everywhere. He is literally the man who's everywhere on television. You know, when I was in Australia, I was watching every time I turned on my television, he was there. Whether it was in the football arena, whether it was in live entertainment or was on a breakfast show, he's absolutely everywhere. So he has the chance, obviously, to make a stand and show people a way forward. And he, you know, he referred to Adam in a joke as King Kong. It made a reference to King Kong. And didn't get that was a problem, and didn't get that it was the casual racism that Adam's got the problem with, as well as the out and out racism that he faced on that very night. So, and what gets me really about Eddie is he has, I believe, well, I know he has seen the film, and this could have been an opportunity for Eddie to go on his own journey, and for him to take some of the people who don't see that casual racism is a problem on a journey as well. And he has chosen not to do that. And he's still, you know, as it says in the film, you know, I was a bit tired, you know, I've been working myself into the ground. And then he pulls the whole, I was working for Aboriginal kids, you know, raising money for them. You know, it's all, I don't care. It was a racist comment. Just admit it and try and educate yourself and other people. And that's a, you know, Anita just mentioned about proving yourself. And there's a moment in the film where, you know, Nicky Winmar has been blackfaced on television, which is actually still on the best of DVD of the Footy Show. That moment is still regarded as one of the best moments of that. Yeah. If you, I mean, we found it on in a shop in Australia. That's how we got the clip. And that, you know, there was a press conference that's called afterwards, and Nicky Winmar is sitting there, the only black face in that room, while all the white corporate people are kind of nodding and smiling, as if he's got the problem. Why can't he take the joke?
Right.
And it's a comment, you know, that's made at the time. It's like, as a black fella, their word, you know, always got to prove yourself. You've always got to prove yourself. It's
Then,
never enough. And you're absolutely right, Anita, in what you say about Adam. He's the most gentle, amazing, kind human being. And now, you know, my daughters call him uncle, and that's the relationship. And they look at the film and they cannot understand why anyone would do that to Adam.
And Dan, you wanted to say, sorry, Ken, you were...
Yes, because I just wanted to come back on then that piece, because you edited it perfectly, because you could tell by the body language in that room as the only black person in there, and they were in a way not arrogant, they were ignorant, and you could tell even with the handshake afterwards that to say, oh yes, we made up for it, you know, and you could tell he wasn't happy. Player wasn't happy. He was just brought there for as a token. Yes, we want to show the world that we're not racist. You know, it was just casual racism, you know, healthy banter as they call it as well, you know, and that really got me going as well in the film.
I was just because of exactly what you're saying, Dan and Anita. I wonder if either of you wanted to comment. Do you feel like there's parallel situations in UK, you know, English and European football?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the main things that I thought when I watched the film was the parallels between the UK and Australia and even the US is the fact that we haven't been able to confront history properly. You know, we're the three nations that refuse to really accept our history and colonialism and the devastating effect it's had on diaspora and people all over the world to this day, and the generational effect of that. And it still carries on within sport and sporting institutions where we're still looking for that support through the governance of, you know, football and other sports, which are still refusing to really take the issue of racism seriously enough. And this is really what these movements globally that are happening is about, is just recognizing people as equal, and our issues as something that nobody should tolerate, no matter, you know, your skin color or background, fundamentally. And honestly, I just think that's the main thing for me, is until we really confront our, you know, how can we move forward when we haven't even really addressed the past.
And I mean, started watching football in the late 70s, and what really shocked me in maybe the last 10 years is how overt it's become now, and like tolerated and accepted, and it's really shocked me. But it's not just in the sports arena; it's sort of daily society, and I think it is absolutely a refusal at a society level to actually look at what, you know, Britain as an empire, what it's done as a colonial power, and where we are now. And yeah, I mean, it's funny. I watch everything that goes on with Adam when I first started watching it, and you're starting to work out what is the equivalent of that in the UK.
Well, this is what do you think? Because this is what I want to know. Do you think there's that kind of equivalent thing going on, or is this just Australia?
No, I think there's definitely parallels here. I think Raheem Sterling's probably the nearest that we've got. You know, you can see that would possibly, he could become a target because he's articulate and he does you know,
stand up.
He winds people up because he has an opinion, but we all know that it's deeper than that. What people have got a problem with, that there are certain, you know, white footballers who have an opinion who won't get anything like the attention that he gets, the negative attention that he gets. So yeah, go on, Ken.
But wouldn't he, in a way, a sort of a powerful statement if a white player or sportsman would stand up and say, listen, we don't stand for racism? Because it's the other way around as well, because we always talk about sort of white towards black, but it's the other way around as well, you know? So I think if a white sports person that would stand up and say, you know what, we're all human beings at the end of the day, enough is enough, you know?
Yeah, I absolutely.
We all should be treated equally, you know? Whatever creed we're from, background, whatever it is.
Yeah, and I wondered when I was watching all the footage, I was like, where was everyone?
You're there, Ken. You've just gone a bit still. Sorry, Dan. Your video's just frozen. Maybe connect. Okay. Yeah, you are. Well, you're back with us now. Sorry, Dan.
No, I was wondering, back in 2013 when Adam, 2014 and 15 when Adam was facing what he was facing, it was like, why is no one? Why aren't they just walking off the field? End of story. And it really pleased me watching the Premier League last night to see those players, every single one of them wearing Black Lives Matter, sending that, those pictures will have gone around the world. But I do think, I wonder though, if you, I'm assuming you've been racially abused, Ken, during your career.
plenty of times.
What did the white players do at that time?
Well, I think for context, Ken, I'd really love you to tell people what it was like going to Chelsea when you went, because certainly we were talking about those days when things were pretty wild.
Oh, that definitely. I told you the story before. When I signed for Chelsea, like I said, in the late 80s. I came in '89, and had a player called Paul Canaville playing there a couple of years before I did. And he played for Chelsea, and he got racially abused by his own supporters. And I remember a couple of the Dutch guys that came over back from England, back to Holland, telling me, Ken, we just know that you signed for Chelsea, but of all the clubs, Chelsea, don't you know that they're one of the most racist clubs in the UK? And I sort of said to myself, listen, I don't care. They've asked me to come and play, and that's what I want to do. I'm going to play. Yeah, but they even racially abuse their own black players. This particular player can't even leave after the game for 2-3 hours. He has to sit in the dressing room, wait until everyone's gone before he can walk back home. And the whole surreal thing was, like I said, only 2 seasons later, I signed for Chelsea. I get voted the first black player of the year by the same supporters. And that was the crazy thing. And of course, when you then talk years later with Paul Canaville about it and say, listen, but it only shows how fickle things are. And of course, at that time, there weren't any sort of frameworks in place to deal and to help and to support players in that situation like we have now. We have the players' union. We have the charities like Show Raising Their Card, Kick It Out, all of that. And there's a whole sort of protocol in place, and it wasn't there. And then you could see it was a scary time in a way. But I went there, played, because I just wanted to show people I'm here to play, regardless of my color. Whatever you're going to shout at me, it won't have any effect. And that's why I'm very passionate. And that's why when I joined Show Raising the Red Card, and we go to schools and the clubs, and we do what we do, and put it out there. Yes, I'm very proud of that, But like I said, and to be fair, I have to give credit, and Anita will back me up on that. That Chelsea, even though with their history, they faced it head on, and they're one of the better clubs in this country now to actually do stuff about racism. They support anything that they can, and they won't tolerate it, And you got to give the owners and the people that are running the club lots of credit, and there's quite a few other clubs that follow suit.
You back that up, Anita?
Yeah, no, I would agree, of course. We had this discussion earlier, and myself and Louise, and, I said from Chelsea, the kind of PR and brand and how they were recognized in the 70s and 80s compared to now is drastically changed. A lot of our supporters are from Africa and lots of places in the world. The fact that we even have a women's club now so well integrated within the club, and the support and integration we have, and we feel as players of the club, honestly, I feel proud to be a Chelsea player. And I know a lot of my teammates feel that way. And even throughout this pandemic, to see the way that Chelsea has stood up for the community and worked to help, essential workers and everybody, proves that that it's a club that is progressive and really trying to make a difference and trying to change and, support, players and people from all different backgrounds. And it's important because as I've always said, football clubs are the beacons of their society, their communities, and they serve them, not just through entertainment, but in many other ways. So it's good to see clubs like that try to lead the way as well.
Yeah, you've one of my questions that I've written down, Anita, was a comment that you had made that racism is not just in sport; it's actually just a reflection of what's going on in society, and obviously concentrates it and magnifies it. And I think that means so much good can be done. But I found it interesting, this sort of, it seems to me extraordinary that we're still having discussions. Like, I'm so amazed that Black Lives Matters and people took a knee last night. So obviously the Premier League must be behind that, which is great to see there's some progress. But we do know that, as you were saying, I think, Dan, maybe Raheem Sterling, people deciding, there's that moment in the film when Stan Grant said, Adam is no longer a football hero, he's the angry Aboriginal, because he decided, I am not going to take this anymore, and I'm going to stand up. And you'd expect the AFL, the Aussie Rules governing body, to have taken a lead, and they didn't because there's a reason why not. So if the Premier League have taken the decision to put Black Lives Matter on the back of every shirt,
hopefully throughout the rest of this season. I think that's brilliant that they've actually taken that lead. That's fairly significant. I know in the AFL, there was, when our film was released, the AFL issued an official apology to Adam. That was 2019. That
Unbelievable.
should have come long before.
Yeah.
And it took the film coming out for them to apologise.
Yeah.
And sad to say that, even just within the last few weeks, the AFL haven't acquitted themselves very well around another player who's been receiving a lot of abuse, and they've been using the opportunity. I mean, I think, Anita, you and I have talked about this, and also Ken, about if you speak up, you have to be brave, don't you, to speak up, because, you're not always in a situation of feeling totally confident, and things happen to you. And then you also have to be somehow a spokesperson, not just for yourself, but for everyone. I mean, that's a pressure, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. And like I said, and loads of the players now, but the thing is, because we have certain protocols in place and support networks, it's easier. And the boys now, they're very savvy. The sport guys now, they're very clued up. They've got a platform that they use for the good. And you've seen it, and then just briefly going to sidetrack with Marcus Rashford, uses his platform to change things. And now you got people like Raheem Sterling, you got Neil Taylor. There's so many different players that actually say, you know what, we're not going to stand for it. There's Jordan Henderson at Liverpool. There's so many players that listen, you know what, this is what we believe in. We've, like I said, are much more aware of stuff now. And there's certain things in place that will back us up. And we're not going to be silent now, you see. And there's a whole movement. And I think 2020 is the year of change. We're writing history in 20, 30 years to come. Like I said, we look back and we say, listen, 2020 was the year that changed quite a few things.
Yeah, I hope you're right, Ken. I know that we've got to be positive and think about that. I just want to make sure everyone knows that Jamal Elsheikh has joined us. Jamal is in Australia, and it is 5:30 in the morning. So I just got to say, everybody, big up to Jamal for doing that. Yeah. Good morning to you. And Jamal is the founder of the One Love Australia Foundation, which takes anti-racism programs into schools, which is very like Show Racism the Red Card. But also, people might not realise that Jamal, apart from many other amazing things he does, has been nominated as someone called the Kindness Hero. It's a national kind of thing. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that in a little bit, Jamal. I just want to go through a few more things that bring up. I wonder, Anita, can you tell me, for you in the documentary, what do you think was the most, well, first of all, what was the thing you learned that you didn't know in the documentary, and what was the most powerful kind of moment that you feel like, oh, because I know you felt you got teary and angry and all sorts.
Yeah, there were so many moments, but I think for me, obviously the context behind Australia, the history, the relationship with Adam and his mother, and understanding, her childhood and what she experienced, and that kind of generational trauma and pain, it doesn't just lie with his mother. It kind of transfers, and he has the weight of that emotional burden to some degree. And as Ken mentioned before, players using their platform, he didn't have to do that, but he realizes it's bigger than him. The impact and change that he can have, and despite all the challenges or obstacles that he was facing, he continued to do that, and you saw the toll it took on him and his career, and that just shows obviously the kind of the sacrifices that come with that as well, sometimes being that person who's in the firing line for your beliefs. So I thought that was extremely powerful, because I know obviously Adam is probably going through this journey still, but the way he has inspired the next generations, and as Ken's mentioned, the way players now, Raheem Sterling, Rashford, these are young players that understand the power they have with their social media platforms and the outreach. And even within the Black Lives Matter movement globally, you're seeing it's a lot of young people on the front lines protesting. They are really empowered and using their voice.
And they've been educated, you see, and they're aware. There's
Yeah.
so much on offer now that my generation, the generation before, didn't have that at their disposal. And these kids now, they're using it and they're not afraid to voice their opinion. What is good?
Of course, and it's the ability to connect that you wouldn't have had in the past. It happens that much quicker, you know, to be able to share your story and collectively become, you know, active in politicizing or, you know, social injustice.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about the social media because it's such a double-edged sword, and I don't know if any of you have come across this, but for example, any kind of film like this would have an ad campaign on social media. And we had, I can't remember how many it is now, ads rejected because we mentioned Black Lives Matters, because we mentioned the word racism. Now, I find that absolutely staggering. So, of course, people go through different things, and the distributor, thank you to Dogwolf, by the way, shout out to them. They gave me some advice on how they've managed to get their campaigns through. But I am not particularly impressed the fact that Facebook are rejecting an ad for a film that is dealing with racism as an anti-racist film and saying it is unacceptable to use those words to bring attention, you know. So I was told, don't use the word racism or anti-racism. I mean,
it's unbelievable, isn't it? The control. You see, and that's why I said, when you look at it, when people say about change, yes, you go into the schools as show race and record or as a player to spread the word, but the change needs to come from the top as well. Leadership needs to really stand up and make things happen, you see, and meet in the middle, you know, and get things off the ground properly, you know.
I think also it's what Dan, you were saying, what you reveal in the film so well is the sort of journey Adam went on of here he is, an elite player. Here he's well paid, he's loved by the country, and yet somehow, you know, that we were saying, you know, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Who made that up? Because clearly words, language matters. And, you know, it's still going on now. And I think, you know, we really need to address that. And, you know, I find watching Adam's unraveling, if you like, as he realizes, because he's an amazingly strong guy, but just obviously when you met him, Dan, you said he was pretty broken by the thing that had just happened.
Yeah, and he's in a much better place now, but he's walked away from the game. You know, he's walked away, he gave 18 years of his life to the game and it didn't give him anything back. And so he's been, because of his foundation, he's gone to 2 AFL games in the 5 years since he's retired. You know, the game's lost him. But, you know, he used his platform, but the reaction and the brutality of that reaction, and he knew nothing about his culture until he went to Sydney and the Swans encouraged him to enrol on a course. He chose Indigenous Studies, and he learnt about his culture through studying it. And so he will have learnt about all the previous leaders that tried to put their head above and then got shot down. And he became, you know, the latest in a long line of those people. And what does that say to a young Aboriginal player who's being abused, who wants to speak out? Because you've seen what happened to the ultimate Aboriginal player. I mean, he's one of the greatest ever players in the history.
Yeah, he was voted best, like his peers voted him. He was just huge.
And so what message does that send? And again, I go back to the fact that the AFL did nothing at the time, which condones what was happening around them. And I don't think, you know, at the weekend there was, you know, more racial abuse of a very good player called Eddie Betts in Australia. And again, you wonder where that could, you know, lead, because there's no one really standing up. Ken talked about leadership. You know, that is ultimately where it comes from.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, Anita, were you talking about the fact that there's more happening in terms of guidance for the players now and people being on boards and, you know, all that sort of thing? I think you're involved in something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's happening more now than it did in the past, in terms of, at least, you know, like FIFA Pro has a player council now where players from both the men and women's game can come and discuss some of these issues and try to develop, you know, strategies to put in place for the wider global game to improve some of these settings. But ultimately, I think the starting point is accepting that racism exists. You know, the fact that it's up for debate is the first problem. It's not a debate.
Why are we having? Yeah,
that's the first problem. It's not a debate. You know, it's there, and it's about, you know, how do we overcome this? And obviously, with the example of Adam Goodes, you know, it's taken all these stars from these, you know, Aboriginal backgrounds. They're like pushing up a boulder every time and getting knocked down. But that's because ultimately they don't have power, you know, in the fundamental sense of the game, the governance of the game, the structures that, you know, support them. And that's the point. We don't have enough diversity on all levels of the game that have influence. And that is whether it's in the management, executive positions, CEO positions, where you can have a diversity of thought and opinion and perspective and life experience. Because, you know, these people wouldn't have lived his life. They wouldn't have experienced the journey that some of these players have gone through, the sacrifices, the abuse, you know, and they don't have a voice. They need a seat at the table. Someone like Adam Goodes should have had a seat at the table, you know, realistically,
so
to develop the you know, the pathway for the game for the future.
And what a complete loss for the game and the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to have him at a senior level because he's walked away.
Absolutely. And I mean, all it does is reflect the same narrative that many Black people and, you know, Indigenous groups are familiar with, is that you're okay with us, you know, our services, but you're not okay with us having a voice and real power, you know, in other areas. That's what we feel, I think, often. And that's what is reinforced again, you know, with this film and this example. You know, he's done everything. He's been exceptional throughout his career. He's been a model, role model, and yet it's still not okay just on the basis of his, you know, his skin color.
What were you going to say, Ken?
And then portrayed it very well in his film when they mentioned about, oh, it's the angry Black man, when he actually speaks up and stands up for himself. And they use the same thing with Raheem Sterling. The moment you sort of start to talk about stuff, how you really feel and the impact it has on you, and people say, oh yes, you've got a chip on your shoulder, it's because you're angry. I notice these things even on a day-to-day case, when you even take the dog out for a walk. Even now, then I'm walking on the street and I tell somebody, could you please put your dog on the lead just in case, you know, if something happens. And then the person turns around, the white person, to me and said, hold on, why are you being so aggressive? I said, excuse me, why am I being aggressive? I'm just asking you politely if you could put your dog on the lead. Yeah, get over, mate. Your dog is aggressive, you're aggressive. I said, you know what, just move on. And when you have to deal with stuff like that, and it's been particularly with a person like an Adam in his position, an elite, that has to try to break barriers and then still nobody gives him any support. But I'm a great believer, things will change because the generation now, they know there's a force behind them. Not only nationally, internationally, globally, people are really sort of thinking, you know what, we need to be heard and we're going to support each other. We are the ones that are going to change, make a big difference, you know? And the people like Adam and many more that will come after him or before.
Do you think, Dan, that, you know, that reflects where Adam is going with his foundation and what he feels?
I mean, Adam's foundation's a lot to do with education and opportunities for young kids. And again, it's one of those that, you know, we're here, we're in 2020. These kids still need the outcomes, and the numbers are horrific for Indigenous children in Australia. You know, they're 3% of, you know, Jamal will back this up. There's 3% of the population and 25% of the prison population. The health out, they die 10 years earlier on average than a white person. Health, education, all those outcomes are horrific, and it's from, you know, an institutional racism towards them that will potentially carry on until there is genuine change. And as Anita said, until there's an acceptance that there is a problem, you can't change it.
Yeah, we all have to. You know, I'd like to bring Jamal in here. Jamal, so glad that you could break through the 5 a.m. I hope you've had your coffee. And I just have to make sure that Jay unmutes you so that you can talk to us. But what I was going to ask you, Jamal, was could you give a little bit of a context of how you've come into all this and you know, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Hi, Jamal.
Good evening. As I was saying, before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm dialing from today, the people of Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. Yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for having me. You know, it's quite surreal. You know, kind of being here at 5 a.m. in the morning and just getting ready. I started sort of my work in the anti-racism sort of space in schools about 2 years ago, and in particular, it was the Christchurch terror attack that actually, you know, kind of highlighted the need for our work. You know, the 15th of March in particular, and the reason is, you know, it's kind of that particular incident actually triggered something that happened to me about 15 years ago. You know, when I was a teenager, I grew up as a third culture kid, so I kind of traveled every 3 to 4 years because of my father's job, and I mean, one of many reasons I should say why the Australian Dream is one of my all-time sort of favorite documentaries is because I can relate to the movie or to documentaries so many levels. You know, kind of traveling, as Adam said at the start, you know, he traveled a lot also using sports as a barrier to kind of get into cultures and get people to know you. So from that level, I can like from the start, it got me, right. But in 2003, I was in Turkey in Ankara, and I remember I was playing sports. I was playing basketball, and I was about to. It was like a public park. I was about to take sort of the throw, and then I had a group of friends of mine, and I could remember them. Like one of them was like, "Run," and I was like, "What is this a joke?" Like I just didn't get it, you know, and things happen so fast in the moment, but at the same time so slow that you can remember everything. And I'm sure everyone who went through sort of a similar experience of whether racism or attack, you know, you could start imagining what's going to happen next. So as I look behind my shoulder, I can see a group of about 8 or 9 people running towards us, right, holding different stuff in their hands, you know, between sticks and cables. And I was like, whoa, this is going to get nasty, you know. And this is what I was saying, things get so fast and so slow. My brain did not connect that they're actually coming after us. You know, I thought like they're coming after some people, but I was like, whoever they're coming after, they're gonna beat the hell out of them, right? And then I was like, oh, okay, they just said run, so probably I should start running now because they're talking about me. I was like, nah, this is all going in my head in seconds, right? I remember there was a bench. I said, I'm gonna sit there, pretending like I'm not with this group of people. I was young. I was about 13 or 14 years old. I'm gonna sit on the bench, pretending like I'm not with those group of people, including my brothers. And if they're really coming after me, then I'll start running. You know, I think at the moment, you know, my kind of legs just frozen. I couldn't actually run. And then all what I remember is kind of, you know, being put on the ground, opened up my neck, and they kind of stabbed me in the neck. You know, I lost consciousness obviously in a matter of seconds, but a stranger who kind of saved my life, you know, a lady walking her dog, and she was like, she kind of told them off, you know. I was taken to the hospitals. That was 15 years ago, right? So, you know, I was like, put so many, you know, there's a bit of a shame, you know, there's a bit of anger. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to tell my parents about it. Just don't look at me. You know, I don't exist. This has never happened. You know, I don't know what you're talking about. Just want to be normal. You know, I want to fit in. I mean, a long story short is, I mean, when that Christchurch terror attack happened the 15th of March, 2018, it just kind of triggered everything in me. You know, started throwing up, being angry, which like stuff like even the Black Lives Matter right now. You know, for people of color, Black people, you know, to kind of get that sense of, I don't know, but for me, it was helplessness in a way. I was like, I feel angry, you know, again. And so then the kind of, you know, we did something there, and then a couple of months after, we did a charity concert in Christchurch, and when I came back, people were like, talk to us. Why did you do this? And I found myself started talking about what I've been through. You know, although it's 15 years, I could still feel it again in my gut, feeling sick, So I started talking about it, and I think as the panel said, you know, it's important to talk about racism, right? And when I started talking about it, you know, we started getting emails from students and from teachers, and like, whoa, this is real. We want you to keep talking about this, and we don't get many people actually say it as it is, you know. And I think that was the time also when the documentary was coming out, you know, that this documentary is something else, you know, especially here in Australia. It's especially in schools, it's perceived in a complete different level. because as Luis said, it kind of highlighted it, the need for important topic for people to talk about, and Adam said it so beautifully in the sort of documentary. He talked about it. Everyone in Australia know who Adam is. He's the Australian of the Year after all, so and there's a huge amount of respect for someone like him, especially in the Australia Day when he was awarded Australian of the Year kind of award. This is something that everyone here aspire for. And to kind of, even on that day, to kind of use the platform, his platform, to talk about racism, people are like, this guy's mad in a way, like he's trying to kind of still kind of force this, but I think it's very important. And he quite clearly and nicely and succinctly talked about the emotional burden of racism, which I feel like something that, unless you kind of experience this, it's really hard to talk about. It's really hard to explain it. And even when you do, it's hard to kind of convey your message to the other person without kind of coming in as an angry person. And there's only a few people like Adam Goods who can do that, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think, Jamal, you say it so eloquently, and it's such a, like you say, when you've been in schools and kids want to talk about this, they actually want to talk about this, and it's so important to have a platform, for people to discuss things. But I don't know, I'm sure, Dan, you're really pleased that the film is being used in schools, because I think it's great to have something like we're doing, having a discussion, using it as a jumping point, because everyone's got different jumping points. And it happens to be, like you say, Dan, you don't make films about sporting people, you make films about people. And one of the things that just gets to me every time is, Adam, like you said, he was so brave taking that platform. You can feel Tony Abbott behind you. You can see in that Australian of the Year, Tony Abbott is an Australian politician. Was he Prime Minister at the time? I can't remember. Oops, we've lost our lighting here. Anyway, never mind. But what I was going to say is it takes an incredible amount of fortitude and bravery to stand up and withstand people's disappointment or disapproval. Like some people, when they're being a little bit more nuanced, will say, I'm very disappointed in you raising that issue. Why should you talk about that when we could be talking about something nice, like you're a great footballer? And the other thing that you bring up, Jamal, which I'm really pleased you did, because I'd like, really, I suppose, to talk about it, is the mental health around just dealing with daily, whether it's microaggressions daily, or whether it's, much more severe and full on, like an attack that you received. And I feel like the only way that people can be as racist as they are is by othering people. That's the only way, surely. And I think what I love about this film, for me at least, is that there is an access into a story that a lot of people in Australia, at least, I don't know what it's like for other people, but who just say, I don't want to hear about that. There's always, everyone's got to talk about, it's so many problems. And Dan, I guess that was a challenge.
In Adam's speech to accept the Australian of the Year, and firstly, he had to deal with his own personal issue with Australia Day, which for Aboriginal people is a horrific, sorrowful day, and a day of mourning, really. But he used that as a platform. Now, I went and if you watch Adam's acceptance speech, there's a small amount of it in the film. Watch the full acceptance speech. It's an amazing speech. And if you see the social media reaction to Adam's speech, it's horrific, because they all pile in on him and accuse him of everything that he doesn't do. And Adam's all about reconciliation. He's all about moving forward. It's the same after he was racially abused by a 13-year-old girl. His first comment in a media conference, which is a film, is, it's not about the girl. We need to protect her. We need to get around her and support her. But we need to have a conversation as to why this happened. And every single person who hates Adam Good to this day will say he called a 13-year-old girl the face of racism, and he didn't. But that's what people say, because that's what people want to use as a stick to beat.
Yeah. Can I just, because I've been very remiss as a host, if you're watching, welcome. There's a lot of people who join us a little bit later. We've got a fantastic panel with Dan Gordon, the director. We've got Anita Asante. We've got Ken Monkou. I hope I said that right. Jamal Elsheikh, he gave me a lesson in that. And please, would you put your questions up on the chat if you want to? We've already got some questions coming in from the audience, so I must make sure we have time for those. What I was going to say is, if I'm being given various things here. Am I going to this one? So the other question has come in from someone who wants to know exactly what we were just talking about. It's not that question. Please don't ask that question. I don't know why. I'm just doing what I'm told. So this one's a question for Dan. Holly would like to know, how do we get docs like this in front of the people who actually most need to see them? Example, the football fans who are defending the statues in London last weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I actually thought you said Hollywood would like to know.
Look, Hollywood probably like that. Yeah, Hollywood would like to know, Dan. They're going to come for you.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, you know, you do have to try and get these people, you know, I'd say these people, but you need to get people who disagree with you to watch an alternate view, and that goes both ways. And one of the questions that we're often asked is, why did you put Andrew Bolt in the film? Now, again, if you're in Australia, Andrew Bolt is of a certain mindset, appealing to a certain mindset.
Who could you say in Britain was the equivalent of Andrew Bolt?
I've actually tried to work that out. I don't know. So, someone who would be, do you know what? A Boris Johnson type person when Boris Johnson was writing for the Telegraph.
Right.
Maybe a bit slightly nastier in tone.
Anybody else? I certainly have an idea who I think would be. Piers Morgan comes to mind.
Maybe Piers Morgan, but Piers started in theory at the Daily Mirror, so slightly.
I can't see that anymore, I'm afraid.
No, I can't say anymore. Andrew Bolt has always been on that side, and I felt, and Stan Grant, as you know, as the writer of the film, we both felt it was disingenuous not to be involved now, and I also thought enough time had passed. Did he see his opinion change as he saw what happened to Adam? And actually, he hadn't. And he hadn't bothered to go and find out the facts anymore. I don't agree with it. It's also a bit, again, disingenuous to say, oh, he didn't realise it at the time. He absolutely knew he was misrepresenting words at the time. But you kind of think, oh, you know, once you see the words again, once you see it, you're not in the thick of it, when you've got a chance to reflect, do you feel differently? And with Andrew Bolt, he absolutely doesn't feel differently. And
there will be people who won't move, but I guess the question was from Hollywood or Holly that, you know, how do you think we get films like this in front of, like, we're all talking and obviously are in some sort of agreement, but I guess how do we get those fans?
The film in the UK is going to be on the BBC. That's a big platform.
That's great.
Get people to watch it. You can't force people to sit down and watch it. What you hope is that enough, I guess, traction is got behind the film that everyone wants to watch it. And then someone who was there in front of a statue who believes a certain thing is pointed to it, and actually it makes them think, oh, hang on a minute, that's like, you know, again, I mean, I watched Ken play. I would watch Ken twice a season playing against Sheffield Wednesday back in the 80s.
For those who don't know, Dan is a Sheffield Wednesday tragic.
And I would play for Southampton and for Chelsea, home and away. And no idea. And actually, Ken was a very likeable player. He wasn't one, and especially for the Chelsea team of that time. And you know, I had no idea until tonight, even though I've done programs with Ken before, I had no idea of his journey. Absolutely no idea of what he's faced in his daily life and the journey that he's taken to become a professional footballer. And I feel I ought to have known. And it also would have made me look at Ken slightly differently, not just as an opposition player, but as a human being. And I think that's really quite important. And I think these days we are told a lot more of people's backgrounds and people's stories, and we do share them a lot more than we used to. So I think there is hope. I'm optimistic.
How we get these stories in front of people?
How do we get the stories in front of? We can't force people. They have to come to it.
But you know, I guess that's why someone like yourself, Jamal, is doing this work with people who are so much younger, and you probably know that Anita and Ken are doing this work with Show Racism, the Red Card. starting younger, I think, is always a good way, isn't it? Like, you're not going to always have change with adults, but Jamal, maybe talk a little bit about, because I was very affected by what you told me about students wanting to talk about the issues raised in the film and how much the curriculum has taken this film on, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll you know, as Kenneth said it, you know, it's really important in schools and in any other organization to get the buy-in from the top in a way, you know, rather than just the people, you know, sort of in the operational level or sort of grassroots level talking about it. One of the many challenges, you know, in our work in schools here in Australia is the buy-in from the principals, and you know, they'd be like, we don't have this issue actually. They'd be like, oh look, you actually do, you know, and I guess, you know, when the teachers kind of started showing, you know, the documentary for the students, you know, over a period of 2 weeks or 3 weeks in the classrooms, they even found out, the teachers and stuff, like, whoa, there's something here going on, you know. This is not just an interest in a subject. This is an interest in something that they have a lived experience with, you know, and now they started talking about it, which begs another question of teachers: how do we talk about it? You know, we're not equipped to talk about it. It's a very sensitive thing, and especially, you know, for sort of Indigenous sort of, you know, talking about what has happened, which is still, I think, Australia, you know, there's a lot of work to be done here in that regard. It kind of begs the question of like, how do we kind of talk about this, deal with this, navigate these conversations, and it's completely important to kind of you know, educate the students at that young age about different forms of, you know, racism, not just the sort of explicit bits, but even the subtle bits, you know, that sort of, you'd be like, oh, is that racist? Should I call this out? What do I do now? That kind of stuff, to talk about it. And I think gradually, you know, sort of even people at sort of a leadership position in school, they're starting seeing like, we need to start talking about this and kind of stop being a bit defensive of worrying about the perception of being a school who have a racism issues and the parents being mad because, or upset, because this is causing sort of students, you know, it's affecting their mental health, them, you know, sort of not coming to schools, you know, an angry sort of incident, an extreme of it. And it's a matter of time, if we don't get on top of this, that it's about to get ugly in a way, unfortunately. So all of these things now is kind of coming to the surface, and with Black Lives Matters in a way, you know, there's a bit of a sort of a buzzword around, let's talk about racism, you know, which I hopefully, you know, this is going to last for a very long while and can actually affect a very meaningful change, because I think it's about time to stop thinking about racism as a taboo subject and start actually acknowledging that we need to talk about it. And look, we cannot. I mean, I think Obama said it beautifully: is, you know, everyone's entitled for their opinion, but you cannot change the facts. You know, and so do not deny that people had experiences in this regard of racism, and try to listen more. And I guess the last thing I would say here is, from our work in school, we found it's really important also to kind of find a bit of an inclusive language, because what I think the conversations need a bit more of is so to speak, the quote unquote, the white allies in a way, you know, buying into the conversation. Because if I talk, of course you're going to talk, you know, you're not a black mad person in a way, you know, of course you're going to talk about racism. So this is actually something also we found is quite helpful in schools to start actually having this conversation, and very meaningful actually conversation, and creating a sense of sort of mateship, if you want to call it, in schools among students.
Yeah,
And to give people permission.
I agree, Jamal. I agree, because this is exactly what we do with Show Race and Red Card. When we go into the schools and the clubs, we talk to these youngsters, but these youngsters go back home and they re-educate the parents and the environment that we're brought up in, you see, and making people aware, Mom, Dad, you can't say these words, you can't speak like that, because this is how it affects somebody. This is how we've been taught. And that's why we have to really, in a way, make sure that we bring that message across to people, you know? And because not only the youngsters. Sorry, Louise.
Sorry, Ken, I really do want to cut across you.
No worries.
Because we've got loads of questions, and I've suddenly, you know, my job as a host is going downhill. Kathy has said, for when you get onto parallels in the UK issues, Goodsey was not alone. Apparently in 2016, Liverpool's first black player, Howard Gale, refused a nomination for an MBE on all sorts of grounds that it would make his African ancestors turn in their graves because of the treatment from the British Empire. So we've got lots of parallels, but I have got another question for you, Dan, which was about Adam and his mum were talking. The bit that I loved in the film the most was Adam and his mum were talking about his ancestors and her family. I really wanted to know more, and wondered if you, the director, the producer, didn't want to go more deeply into the background, or if they really didn't know much when they started.
In what respect? Sorry.
I don't have much more than that. They just wondered if you didn't want to go further into the story, or whether that was all you had.
Adam's knowledge of his ancestry is limited because his mum doesn't know. She was snatched, for people who haven't watched the film, she was taken from her parents at the age of 5 or 6.
Yeah.
You know, and was brought up in a white family, because it was part of official Australian policy to, you know, smother the black side of Australia, and you know, just drive them out. And so he didn't know, and in fact it was only when he did Who Do You Think You Are, the Australian version of it, that the researchers found out his background, his family background. He knew the 2 tribes that they came from, but didn't really know about them, and had never been to the Flinders Ranges, which, you know, we were very honoured to go, you know, as part of the film, to retrace.
Yeah, what was that like for you to go back with that?
That's some of the most memorable filming I've ever done, to have been out in some genuine outback and be with his people on his land, and this is land that they've been on for 60,000 years. It was an incredibly powerful, you did feel very spiritual side of it there. That was amazing. But the fact is that Adam doesn't know, and Adam is learning himself. So he goes back. It's called going back to country, when you go back to where your ancestors are from. And he's gone back to country, and there are elders who are informing him some of the tribal language, but also the customs and the stories, because nothing was ever written down. It was always passed down generation to generation, orally. So he's being told that, but he didn't know that. Now, his cousin Michael O'Loughlin, very, very good friend of his and fellow Sydney Swans player, grew up with the culture, so knows it. Stan Grant, his dad is a very well-known linguist as well of his culture, and so Stan knows a lot more about his people, but Adam's learning, and I found that quite sad, really. I mean, very tragic from him. Again, he's very, very proud of who he is, and there are outsiders just trying to knock that pride out of him. I
think it's obvious that you know, there are people who think that that's okay to say, and it's extraordinary, isn't it? Because I just have so much admiration for him, and you showed it in the film. Adam's a very reserved character, and I think it was seeing the various betrayals that were what got me. You know, the moments in the film are when I see who he sees as, you know, he was very honest and accepted Eddie's apology the first time, and he's a very, you know, big man to do that, and then to find out that it's just absolute rubbish. It cuts very deep, and I think you did it brilliantly in the film. We've got another question, which is there any way to persuade high-profile managers to be more active? This is in the UK. Get them reinforcing it's not acceptable or humane, not just leave it to each new playing generation, like the Sterlings, the Rashfords, the Howard Gales, to keep doing it. So that's one for you and Ken and Anita, I guess.
Yeah. Behind the scenes, there's loads of stuff happening, like I said, with this on the board program that the FA and the PFA supported, and it's been put on together by Carl George, with sports people that played the game, that actually been educated and been taught how to sit on boardroom level. And I've been on that program as well and graduated on that, and to actually sit. And that's what I said, because it needs to come from the top to make the change. How much you encourage and push from the bottom upwards, from the top. If that ceiling sits on there, you can't break through it, things won't change. So we found ways around it and actually educate people properly, and to get that on merit, not because the color of our skin, but what we actually stand for and our qualities, to actually lead and make a change. And that's what needs to happen. And that will gradually, because you see it now with people like, for instance, Paul Elliott, that sits on the FA board regarding inclusion. And you've got people like, for instance, Lord Simon Woolley, you know, that advises the government as well, you know, and he says as well, and I like what he said. He said we shouldn't, like I said, hide from the fact of a nasty past, you know. Racism is a consequence of the past, and we should educate and make people aware. But you need people, proper leaders, to stand up and to hold that flag and say, listen, this is what we stand for. We're now going to change. And that's why I believe there's a change, there's a movement coming in 2020. And the moment is there, you know, but it will change because we got people in places already chipping away and have been
doing stuff. Yeah. Would you concur with that, Anita? Do you think that's happening?
Yeah, I think it's happening, but I still think it's, you know, the point is, you know, some of the change sometimes feels too slow for some people. And I think it's also, like you say earlier, about having alliances that really believe in that agenda and really going to push it forward. And being there on merit is the key as well, because I think a lot of people feel that sometimes quotas are filled for this kind of tokenistic element, where they're there, but they don't have power, really, you know, or you know, executive power or veto or vote or whatever to make these changes. So I think that's imperative, and making sure that there is the diversification of representation on all these different levels, and that includes gender as well, and diversifying the perspectives is crucial to that, because there's a lot of, you have to look at an intersectional level as well, why it may not be happening. Or
Anita, you can't just chuck those big multi-syllable words around. Come on. What do you mean by intersectional?
Well, you know, it's not just one factor that's affecting why we don't see those people in those positions. There's multiple, and that comes from, you know, where they location to education to opportunity to resources, to opening that door, someone believing in you, you know, seeing your potential and supporting that potential, the actual right programs and strategies to be proactive and go after people. Sometimes there's the feeling that they're waiting for people to just show up and think it will just happen, but no one's seen that change happen for so long. They don't think that space is for them, so you got to go after them as well. You have to go and literally, you know, show people this is the door, I'm giving you the opportunity, and I'm going to support you as well. So yeah, I think it is happening, and I know there's lots of really good people behind the scenes trying to make it happen, but this is the time, as Ken's mentioned, 2020, there's a lot of force.
Trust me, people are knocking on their door. They're knocking on their door. Trust me.
Yeah, Dan, you were going to come in there.
I was going to ask Anita, you know, as a player now in 2020, coming to the end of your playing career, do you see a pathway for yourself? Do you see representatives that feel and look like you and your beliefs? Do you see those role models at more than player level? Do you see the coaches, the managers, the boardroom members that you can aspire to be? Do you see any examples of that at all?
I'm seeing those shifts starting to happen. You know, I'm happy to say one of my ex-teammates is now a director at Aston Villa, you know, football club, you know, the first female Black appointed as well. And I think that's a huge progression, a huge step. So it is happening, and it's great, because it's exactly what we want the young people to see that, you know, there are some of those ceilings that are being knocked through, and we can all aspire to that. And I feel empowered too, because there's lots of people around me, Black and white, whoever, who are having these discussions and are willing to you know, call me up and other people I know and say, you know what, you have the ability to be in this position in the next few years. You know, why didn't you go for it? Or why didn't you tell that person about it? And that's what we're really talking about, you know. None of us, even in this position, I don't want to be handed something on the basis of the color of my skin, but there is a reality of knowing that, you know what, there's a generations of people that have been left behind for such a long time, and we need to bridge those gaps as well.
And maybe, you know, Dan was asking you the question, do you see those role models ahead? It may be that you're going to be the role model for someone else, the way Ken's been the role model, you know, earlier and stuff.
I looked for role models in other sports as well, you know, growing up. I didn't see them in football directly. So I looked for them, you know, in tennis, where, you know, the Venus and Serena Williams were, in athletics, where we were, you know, highly represented, or basketball. There's lots of role models, you know, that I could take inspiration from. And I think that's what keeps, you know, players trickling through in different elements of sport all the time, because they're there. And it just takes one Adam Goods, or, you know, someone who's gone through that, who stands up, takes the punches and keeps talking, to bring us all along.
Yeah,
well.
no, I think so. And listen, we're getting a bit of the wind-up signal, but I just wanted to let you know it's such an interesting discussion. I could talk about this for ages, but we've had quite a few people sort of saying in different ways to us, emailing and stuff, that people say there was things like compulsory history books, but maybe there should be compulsory docs like this. So Dan, you'd like that one to be on the, and a lot of people...
I mean, it's being used as, Jamal said, it's being used as an educational tool in Australia, and hopefully will be in the UK. The film, as you know, was going to be released in the cinemas in March, and I'd lined up at my own daughter's school that we were going to take the kids to watch this at the cinema, and then I was going to do, a Q&A with all the children, because they faced their own challenges as well, and the school was very, very proactive in being behind that. With everything that's happened, obviously we haven't done that, but I'd like to see that it's used in the UK for sure. That it is it's an accessible story as well for people to then see the bigger picture. I think that's what, it's not a preachy film. It's not a film that this is about racism. It's far more than that. I think it enables children to have a very, very open conversation, which I think, again, is, as Ken keeps saying, the time's now. Yeah,
time for a change. Sam Cooke, he's the man. Got that sing song going in my head so much. Look, I think I'm being told. So I just wanted to give everyone the last word. Jamal, I feel like I'd just like to know for you, what's the most positive aspect of having the Australian dream in your teaching and your learning in the classroom, and what you're doing with your program, both with One Love Australia and the other things that you're setting up, doing many exciting programs there. Can you give us kind of in a quick snapshot what sort of is the most positive thing about it for you?
It's very fun that it's around that that sort of someone to look up to, and be like, someone to this,
Can I just stop you for a second, Jamal? Is anyone else having trouble hearing?
Yes.
Yeah. Just check. Try and say something. Yeah, much better.
Yeah, saying, I think the most someone like Adam, kind of watch it and up to him. Not alone in this. Someone else is doing this, and I.
Do you know, Jamal, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you only because I want to hear what you're saying, and I can kind of lip read, but your signal is breaking up. So maybe you should leave and come back, like leave the meeting and then try and rejoin us, and I'll just do a sum up with everyone else. And maybe Ken, you could give me kind of, we had such a great number of conversations about this film, I know you and I, and you were very inspired by it. So maybe if you want to give us your sum up.
So my sort of thing is, like I said, through the all of us mentioned the word education, and I think that's key. We need to start educating people from all sorts of background, age groups, and whatever it is, about making people aware about this racism, the ugly face of racism. And as I said, it's about a time that we're going to change, and the change is coming. To sort of back you up with the Sam Cooke thing, but it is true. I feel strongly this is the time. The momentum is there, and it took, unfortunately, as well, the killing of George Floyd, in America to get this whole thing moving. But then the film of Adam, like I said, couldn't be at a better time. The timing of it again, you see. I'm a great believer in providence, things coming together when the earth. You can't find nature. Nature will always find its way. And I think this is the time for us to all come together and actually alter the ugly face of racism. That's what I think. But it takes braveness in lots of different ways to make it happen.
And Anita, I'm coming up the page to you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a humanistic take on a person and their life and their journey, and it taps into vulnerability and being brave. And I think any human can relate to that. And it's about us all getting to this vulnerable place where we can take these difficult issues and discuss it and confront it, because it's not just going to take Black people, Indigenous people to create these changes. It's going to take all of us, and people always need people, you know, at the end of the day. So, you know, I also agree. I'm optimistic. I think I know there's lots of people that are also optimistic and want to see a change and are working towards that. But I think it's also very important for everyone to acknowledge that when we see someone like Adam or any player, athlete, person who's vulnerable like that, that people take responsibility, that we're not policing how people should react to something that's said or done to them. Because that, for me, is what upset me the most and angered me, is that despite everything that he's going through, people are still policing him on how to behave and how to react to something that he is experiencing. And you mentioned the guy from the media as well, and how he twisted words, you know, in a moment where he could have influenced a great shift within the community of sports and in the world. He chose to use that as an opportunity to, you know, attack him when he was, like you said, protecting a young girl. So yeah, I think that it's just important to be mindful of that.
Yeah, thank you. And Dan, I'd like to, what's your sort of takeaway from everything that you've gone through? Because you've now made the film and taken it on the road and seen what's happening with it.
I mean, the big thing for me was how you know, how people recognize their own childhood and their own life. That was the biggest thing for me, that no matter where we went in the world, this was not an Australian story. This had roots everywhere in the world with all people. And one of the things that I really learned as well is, it's not what you say necessarily or how you say it, it's how it's received. You know, and the banter that Ken referred to, you know, before in the old days, oh, it's just banter, it's just a joke, mate, get over it. You know, can't you take a joke? It's like, well, actually, no, you can't, because I've had this all my life. And someone that's never received that before has got no idea what those words do. So that's something that I really took, that we also need to change. We need to be very mindful, as Anita said, we need to be mindful of what we say and how we say it, and really understand how it's going to be received. And the only way you are going to do that is by talking to someone who's from a completely different background that you don't know anything about, and understanding where they've come from, rather than seeing them in the street and making a judgment on them.
Yeah, thank you. And Jamal, the last words. I hope your audio is coming through better now. Do you want to just try and sum up for you?
Can you hear me?
Can try and speak to us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right. I guess
just briefly, if you could sum up what's your takeaway from the film.
Right. I was saying, you know, seeing more and more sort of role models and influencers talking about this in public in a way, and talking about their experiences, and that how that is sort of perceived by younger generation is what gives me a sort of a sense of hope and optimism. I guess a very quick thing I would say is, you know, at the start of this year, before the sort of COVID happened, we were running a competition, anti-racism competition, like Show Racism the Red Card, and we were sort of trying to figure out what could be the prize or the incentive for the best ideas or projects. And we tried to think about different things: money can buy experiences, getting high-profile people from Australian Human Rights Commission, and almost all the students, they said we would like to be able to meet Adam Goods. And for us, we just look at this, we were like, whoa, this is something. Sort of, this is the power of sort of the influencers talking about this and what effect they have on younger generations.
That's a beautiful way to end, I think, because you know, that would have been my prize, and I'm not at school. If I could have met Adam Goods, that would have been my prize. And I'd just like to finish up by thanking everybody and saying, I'm getting another message. Oh yes. When is it going to be on the BBC? Do you know, Dan? And other people in the discussion are saying we should promote this film as much as possible. Do you have a date yet or not yet?
I really wish I'd been briefed on that one. I believe it may be. All I've been briefed on is the AustralianDream.co.uk is where you can download the film at the moment.
Yeah.
And I believe it'll be August-ish. Watch this space.
Okay, so
if you can, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, I think what we can say is that we should be encouraging people to get their friends to download it, to watch it, And could we get it maybe promoted into the local football clubs? I think that, you know, something that maybe the footballers.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. We'll definitely help with that.
If we could talk about, you know, that as a way going forward for the UK. And I just need to say thank you so much for your generosity and your time, everybody. And thank you to our wonderful audience who's been really saying such wonderful things about the film. I can't say everything. Can I sum up by saying thank you so much to Jamal for getting up this ridiculous hour. We really salute you. And I hope you enjoy the next coffee that you have. And to Ken, thank you very much for all your lovely messages to me and the conversations we've had. I've really enjoyed them. And also, Anita, your generosity. And for everybody who's going through what everything is happening in the world right now, I think we all have to acknowledge as well that it's sometimes really tiring to have to keep going back to these discussions. And it's very different. And I'm hoping that this world is changing like your optimism says. And finally, Dan, thank you so much. We're honoured to have you on the programme, and hopefully we'll be able to welcome you to all of you to Hampton Bridge Film Festival one day in person, where we can give you a really warm welcome. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Promote the film.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thanks,
Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye.